what is yesterday, what is last year. So finding what happened yesterday, you could listen to radio, you can watch television, you can read a newspaper. Last year maybe you can ask somebody who remembers. But what about long ago? Ancient times, 200, 300, 500 and 2000 years ago. So what can we know about the past? There are various things we can find out. What people ate, the kind of clothes they wore, the houses in which they lived. We can also find out about their lives. They may be hunters, herders, farmers, rurals, and merchants, priests, craftsperson, artists, musicians, and scientists. We can say and we can find out the children, what game they played, the stories they heard, the plays they saw, and they sing which song. So where did people live? We just need, I'll show you some pictures before that. Find the river Narmada on map. I'll just show you. So people have lived along the banks of this river for several 100,000 years. Some of the earliest people who lived here, they were called gatherers. That is the people who gathered their food. They knew about the vast wealth of the plant in the surrounding forest. Flora and fauna collected roots, fruits, and other forest produced for their food. They also hunted the animals. So these are the rivers. These are different rivers, and it is assumed and it is found that mostly people would like to stay in the vicinity of the river. So this is your Narmada. This is your Narmada river. Now, just find Suleiman and Kirtar hills to the northwest. I'll show you that also because it's here, Kirtar and Suleiman hills. Some of the areas where women and men first began to grow crops like the wheat and barley around 8,000 years ago, they are located here, Kirtar and Suleiman. So people also began rearing animals like the sheep and the goat, the cattle, and they lived in villages. You can locate the Garo hills here. These are the Garo hills to the northwest, and Vindhyas in India. So this is, you can find Vindhyas also. These are different. This is Vindhyas. So there were some of the other areas where agriculture was the main key, so it was developed, and the places where rice was first grown are the north of the Vindhyas. You can trace the river Indus and their tributaries. Tributaries are small rivers that flow into the larger river eventually. So about 4,700 years ago, some of the earliest cities flourished on the banks of these rivers. Later, about 2,500 years ago, cities developed on the bank of the Ganga and its tributaries, and also the sea coast. You can locate Ganga and tributary called the Sun, or you can say Son. In Hindi we call it as Son. So in ancient times, the area along these rivers to the south of the Ganga was known as Magadha or Magad. Its rurals, the people who rules, they were very powerful and set up large kingdoms. So kingdoms were set up in other parts of the country as well. And throughout, people traveled from one end to another end, from one continent to another continent. The hills and high mountains, including the Himalayas, the deserts, the rivers and sea, made journeys quite dangerous sometimes, but never impossible. So men and women, they moved in search of livelihood, also to escape from natural disasters like the floods and droughts. Sometimes men marched in armies, conquering the lands, the others' lands, And besides, merchant traveled with caravans and ships carrying valuable goods from place to place. There were religious preachers and teachers. They walked from village to village, town to town, stopping to offer their instruction and advices. Finally, some people perhaps traveled driven by spirit of adventure. They want some adventurism, wanting to discover new and exciting places. All this lead to the sharing of ideas between people. So this is a map, as you just saw, of South Asia, including the present countries of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan and Sri Lanka, and the neighboring countries like Afghanistan, Iran, China and Myanmar. South Asia is often called a subcontinent because although it is smaller than a continent, it is very large and it's separated from the rest of Asia by sea, hills and mountains. That is why the South Asia is called as subcontinent. So these movement of people, they enrich the cultural tradition. People have shared new ways of carving stones, composing music, and even cooking food over several hundreds of years. So how the names have come, names of the land. Two of the words we often use for our country, these are India and Bharat. So the word India comes from the Indus, which is called Sindhu in Sanskrit. Indus, from where the India has come. We can find Iran and Greece, different places. So Iranians and Greeks who came through the northwest about 2500 years ago, and they were familiar with this Indus and call it Hindos or Indos, and the land to the east of the river was called India. So name Bharat was used for a group of people who lived in the northwest and who were mentioned in Rig Veda, the earliest composition in Sanskrit, dated about 3500 years ago. And later it was used for our country, Bharat and India. So if we want to find out about the past, there are several ways of finding out about the past. One is to search and read books which were written long back. These are called manuscript because they were written by hand. They comes from the Latin word manu or manu, that means hand. So they were usually written on palm leaf or on specially prepared bark of a tree known as birk, which grows in Himalayas. This is an example, this page from a palm leaf manuscript. So if you see, this manuscript was written about 1000 years ago. Palm leaves were cut into pages and then tied together to make books, right? So over the years, many manuscripts were eaten away by insects, some were destroyed, but many have survived. Many are still intact, so often preserved in temples and monasteries. So these books dealt with all kinds of subjects: religious belief, practices, the lives of kings, medicine, science. And besides, there were epics, poems, plays. So many of these were written in Sanskrit. Others were in Prakrit, that is, those ordinary people would speak, and Tamil. So we can also study the inscriptions. These are written on relatively hard surface, like the stone and metals. Sometimes kings got their orders inscribed so that the people could see, read and obey them. So there are other kinds of inscriptions as well, where men and women, including the kings and queens, recorded what they did. For example, the kings often kept records of victories in battle. So can you think an advantage of writing on a hard surface, and what could have been difficulties? Advantage is that once you write, it is very difficult to fade. So an old inscription, this inscription dates to about 2250 years ago, and this was found in Kandahar, present day Afghanistan. So it was written on the orders of ruler named Ashoka. When we write anything, we use a script. Script consists of letters and signs. So we read what is written or speak, we use a language. This inscription was written in two different scripts and languages, Greek and Aramaic, which were used in that area. So there were many other things that were made and used in the past. Those who study these objects, they are known as archaeologists. They are known as archaeologists, and they study the remains of building made up of stones and bricks, painting and sculpture. They also explore and excavate, that is, dig under the surface of the earth to find any tool, weapon, pot, pan, ornaments, and coins, and various other things. So some of these objects may be made of stone, some may be made up of bone, baked clay, or metal. So objects that are made up of hard, imperishable substance, they usually survive for a longer period of time. So here we have a pot from old city. Pots like this were used about 4700 years ago. And then we have old, we'll just see an old silver coin such that this were in the use from 2500 years ago. So this is how it is different from what we use. So archaeologists also look for bones of animals, birds, and fish in order to find out what people would eat in that past. Plant remains survive far more rarely. If seeds of grain or pieces of wood, they have been burned. They survive in charred form. Historians, that is scholars who study the past, often use the word source to refer to the information found from manuscript, inscriptions, and archaeology. Once these sources are found, learning about the past becomes an adventure as we reconstruct it bit by bit. So historians and archaeologists, they are like detectives. They use all the sources like the clues in order to find about the past, our past. So are they one past or many past? See, did you notice the title of this book, Our Past? So we have used the word past in plural in order to draw attention to the fact that the past was different for different groups of people. Everyone will not have same past. For example, the lives of herders or farmers were different from those of kings and queens. The lives of merchants were different from those of craft persons, and like this. So also it is true even today. People follow different practices and custom in different parts. Different part of the country. For instance, today most people live in the Andaman Island, get their own food by fishing, hunting, and collecting forest produce. But most people living in cities, they depend on others for supplies of food. So differences such as these existed in the past as well. Besides this, there is another kind of difference. We know a great deal about kings and battles they fought because they want to keep record of their victories. And generally the ordinary people such as the hunters, fishing folks, gatherers, farmers, or herders did not keep records of what they did. While this archaeology helps us to find about their lives, there is much that remains unknown till now. So what do this date means? If someone comes to you and asks you the date, they'll probably mention the day, month, and year. 2000, 2010, 2019, like this. So these years are counted from the date generally assigned to the birth of Jesus Christ, the founder of Christianity. So 2000 means 2000 years after the birth of Christ. 2000 means 2000 years after the birth of Christ. All dates before the Christ are counted backwards. That is, usually we use letter BC. BC means before Christ. So we will refer to the dates going back from the present using 2000 as our starting point, right? So letters with dates BC, as we saw that BC is before Christ. So you will also see sometimes AD before the dates, which means in Latin, basically it's two Latin words, A and D, Anno Domini, which means in the year of the Lord, that is the Christ. So 2005, it can be written as AD 2005. Sometimes CE is used instead of this AD and BCE instead of BC. So this letter CE, what does it mean? It stands for Common Era, and BCE stands for Before Common Era. So we use these terms because the Christian era is now used in most countries of the world, and in India we began using this form of dating from about 200 years ago. And sometimes this BP is also being used, that is before present. There is one more thing which we need to discuss. See, we have seen that inscriptions, these are written on hard surface. So many of these were written several hundreds of years ago, and all inscriptions, they contain both scripts as well as languages. So languages which were used as well as scripts, they have changed over a period of time. So how do this scholar understand what was written? This can be done through a process which is known as decipherment. Previously, something may be represented by L, and the same thing how it is represented now, it's a way of decipherment because things might have changed. So when we go to the more discursive part of this, one of the most famous stories of decipherment comes from Egypt. This is a country in North Africa where there were kings and queens about 5,000 years ago. So Rosetta is a town on the north coast of Egypt, and here an inscribed stone was found, and which contained inscriptions in 3 different languages and scripts: Greek and 2 different forms of Egyptians. So scholar who could read Greek figured out that the names of kings and queens were enclosed in a little frame. They called it as cartouche. So they then placed the Greek and Egyptian signs side by side, and then they identify the sounds from which these Egyptian letters stood. So as we can see in the previous diagram I just showed you, the lion stands for L and birds for A. And once they knew what the letters stood for, they can understand the inscriptions more clearly and more comfortably.